My son told me I'd die alone. And then 6 numbers changed everything. The cruelest words came from the person I'd sacrificed everything for, and the sweetest revenge came from a convenience store receipt I almost threw away. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 62 years old. For the past 3 decades, I've lived in a modest duplex in Riverside, California, working double shifts as a hospital custodian to support my ungrateful family. The night my son David screamed those words at me, I was holding a lottery ticket in one hand and my bruised heart in the other. What I didn't know was that those 6 numbers would teach him exactly how expensive his cruelty would become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me tell you who I really am, because my family seemed to have forgotten long ago. I immigrated to America from Taiwan when I was 19 years old, speaking broken English and carrying nothing but determination and dreams for a better life. I met my husband James at a community college ESL class where we both struggled with verb tenses and pronunciation while falling in love over shared textbooks and cafeteria coffee. James was a gentleman who worked in construction, and together we built a small but stable life in Riverside. When David was born, we made a pact that our son would have every opportunity we never had. He would go to college, speak perfect English, and never know the shame of being looked down upon for an accent or a misunderstood word. For 23 years, I kept that promise, even after James died of a heart attack when David was only 15. While other widows might have remarried or moved in with relatives, I chose to work harder. I took on extra shifts at Riverside General Hospital, mopping floors and cleaning rooms from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., then sleeping a few hours before picking up day shifts at a medical office cleaning service. My hands became permanently stained with industrial cleaner, my back curved from years of bending over mop buckets, and my social life disappeared entirely. But David's college fund grew steadily, his private tutoring continued without interruption, and his acceptance letter to UC Berkeley arrived right on schedule. I was so proud the day he graduated with his business degree. David Chen, my American-born son, walking across that stage in his cap and gown while I sat in the audience wearing my best dress from Target, the one I'd saved for months to buy. I thought I'd finally succeeded in giving him the life James and I had dreamed of. But somewhere between his college graduation and his first corporate job, David began to see me differently. I wasn't the mother who'd sacrificed everything for his success. I was the embarrassment who reminded him of humble beginnings he wanted to forget. The transformation happened gradually, like watching a photograph fade in sunlight. At first, it was small corrections when I spoke English incorrectly in front of his new girlfriend, Ashley. "Mom, it's I went, not I go. And you're embarrassing yourself," he'd whisper harshly during family dinners I'd spent hours preparing. Then came the suggestions about my appearance. "Mom, maybe you should dress a little nicer when you come to my work events. People notice these things." My Target clothes weren't good enough for his professional world, apparently, though they were purchased with money earned scrubbing floors to pay for his education. The final blow came when he moved in with Ashley, a blonde marketing executive from Orange County whose parents owned a chain of boutique hotels. Ashley had never worked a day of manual labor in her life, never struggled to pronounce an English word correctly, and never understood why anyone would choose a career in custodial work. To Ashley, I wasn't David's devoted mother. I was a curious relic of his past that needed to be politely managed and gradually phased out of their upwardly mobile lifestyle. David started visiting less frequently, calling only when he needed something, and speaking to me with the kind of impatient tone people use with slow cashiers or confused elderly relatives. When Ashley got pregnant last year, I thought surely my grandchild would bring us closer together. Instead, it pushed us further apart. "Mom, Ashley and I have been talking," David said during one of his rare visits to my duplex. He looked around my small living room with visible distaste, his eyes lingering on my worn furniture and the family photos I'd carefully arranged on hand-me-down end tables. "We want to raise our child in a different environment, somewhere more sophisticated. Ashley's parents have offered to help us with a down payment on a house in Newport Beach. Newport Beach? Where his cleaning lady mother would stick out like a sore thumb among the yacht clubs and country clubs? That's wonderful, honey, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. I'm so happy for you both. When will you move? We already put in an offer, he said, not meeting my eyes. And Mom, we need to talk about boundaries. Ashley feels uncomfortable with how involved you try to be. Maybe it's better if you call before coming over, and maybe limit visits to once a month or so. Once a month? To see my only child and my future grandchild? After 23 years of working double shifts to fund his dreams? But I swallowed my hurt and agreed, because I thought that's what love looked like. Accepting whatever scraps of attention he was willing to give me, being grateful for any inclusion in his new life, and never making demands that might push him away entirely. The baby arrived 6 months ago. Little Emma, a beautiful girl with David's dark hair and Ashley's blue eyes. I fell in love the moment I saw her tiny face in the hospital photo. David texted me 2 days after she was born. 2 days! He waited 2 days to tell his mother that her daughter had arrived safely. When I finally met Emma, she was already 3 weeks old. Ashley handed her to me reluctantly, hovering nearby as if I might somehow contaminate their perfect child with my working-class background. Please be careful with her head, Ashley said anxiously, though I'd raised David successfully for 23 years. And maybe wash your hands again. I know you work in a hospital and germs. I bit my tongue and re-washed my hands, then held my granddaughter for exactly 15 minutes before Ashley decided Emma needed to eat and sleep. When I offered to help with anything, babysitting, cooking, cleaning, Ashley's smile was politely dismissive.
We have everything under control, Margaret. David's mother doesn't need to worry about anything. David's mother, not Emma's grandmother, not even Mom. I'd been reduced to a title that emphasized my relationship to David rather than my own identity or importance. The monthly visits became increasingly strained. I would drive the 45 minutes to their beautiful Newport Beach house, bringing carefully chosen gifts that Ashley would accept with lukewarm thanks and David would barely acknowledge. Emma would cry when I held her, not because she didn't like me, but because we were strangers. 3 months ago, the visits stopped altogether. Mom, Ashley's having some postpartum anxiety, David explained over the phone. The doctor thinks it's best if we limit visitors for a while, just until she feels more stable. Of course, I said immediately. Whatever Ashley needs. But maybe I could just drop off some food? I made that soup you used to love when you were sick. Mom, we have a meal delivery service now. We don't really need homemade food. A meal delivery service, instead of his mother's cooking. When do you think I might be able to see Emma again? I asked carefully. There was a long pause. We'll let you know when things settle down. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of no visits, brief phone calls, and text message updates about Emma's milestones that felt more like duty than affection. Last week, I drove by their house on my way home from work, hoping to catch a glimpse of my granddaughter playing in their beautifully landscaped front yard. Instead, I saw Ashley's parents' Mercedes in the driveway and heard laughter coming from the backyard. They were having a family barbecue. A family barbecue that didn't include David's mother. I parked across the street and watched through the window as Ashley's parents played with Emma, as David grilled expensive steaks, as they all enjoyed the kind of family gathering I hadn't been invited to in months. When David's phone rang and he glanced at the caller ID, I saw him show the screen to Ashley. They both looked annoyed. He declined the call. He was declining calls from his mother while entertaining Ashley's parents in the backyard. That night, I called him from my duplex. He answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear Emma crying in the background. "Mom, this really isn't a good time." "I know, honey, but I miss you all so much. It's been 3 months since I've seen Emma, and I was hoping maybe this weekend." "Mom, I told you Ashley needs space. Can't you respect that?" "I do respect it, David, but I'm your mother. I'm Emma's grandmother. Doesn't that count for something?" His sigh was audible through the phone. "Mom, you need to understand that our lives are different now. We have different priorities, different social circles. Ashley's family understands our lifestyle better." "What does that mean?" "It means—" He paused, and I could hear Ashley saying something in the background. "It means maybe you need to accept that we've outgrown the kind of relationship we used to have." Outgrown. Like I was a childhood toy he'd lost interest in. "David, I love you. I worked my whole life to give you opportunities, and now I just want to be part of your family." "And we appreciate everything you did," he said, in the tone people use when they're trying to end a conversation politely. "But that doesn't mean you're entitled to unlimited access to our lives." Entitled for wanting to see my grandchild. I'm not asking for unlimited access. I'm asking to see my family occasionally. That's when his voice changed. The polite distance disappeared, replaced with something cold and cruel. "Mom, you need to face reality. You're a hospital janitor who lives in a duplex in Riverside. Ashley and I are building a life in Newport Beach with people who share our values and our aspirations. You don't fit into that world, and honestly, it's exhausting trying to pretend otherwise." The words hit me like a physical blow. "David, I'm your mother, and I'm grateful for that, but being my mother doesn't give you the right to impose yourself on my new family. Ashley's family contribute to our lives in meaningful ways. They help with the house, they understand our goals, they elevate our social status.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
You drag us down. I was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what my son had just said to me. "David, I sacrificed everything for you. I worked double shifts for years to pay for your education. I gave up my own dreams so you could have yours. And that was your choice, Mom. I never asked you to work as a janitor. I never asked you to sacrifice your social life. You made those decisions, and now you want me to feel guilty about them for the rest of my life? I don't want you to feel guilty. I just want to be part of your life." Well, maybe you should have thought about that before choosing a career that embarrasses me. Maybe you should have tried harder to fit into polite society instead of staying stuck in your immigrant mindset. Immigrant mindset. As if the values that had driven me to work tirelessly for his success were character flaws to be ashamed of. David, please don't say things like that. Mom, I'm telling you the truth. Ashley's right. You're needy, you're clingy, and you don't understand boundaries. Every time we try to include you, you make everything about yourself and your sacrifices. It's exhausting. I started crying then, which only seemed to annoy him more. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. The guilt trips, the tears, the emotional manipulation. Ashley's family doesn't do this kind of drama. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I'm just heartbroken. Well, maybe it's time you learn to deal with your emotions like an adult instead of making them everyone else's problem. That's when he said the words that shattered what was left of my heart. Mom, if you keep pushing this, if you keep making demands and trying to force your way into our lives, you're going to end up completely alone. Emma will grow up barely knowing you exist, and I'll be too busy with my real family to deal with your neediness. You'll die alone in that little duplex, and it will be because you couldn't respect our boundaries. You'll die alone. The words echoed in my mind long after he hung up. My son,
The child I'd raised alone after his father died, the boy I'd worked myself to exhaustion to support, had just told me I would die alone because I wanted to be part of his life? I sat in my small living room that night, surrounded by photos of David at every stage of his life. Birthday parties I'd thrown on a custodian's budget, Christmas mornings where I'd wrapped presents I'd saved months to afford, graduation ceremonies where I'd beamed with pride at his accomplishments. All those memories felt contaminated now by his cruel words. I looked around my duplex with fresh eyes, trying to see it the way David and Ashley did. The furniture was old but clean, mismatched pieces I'd bought secondhand and arranged with care. The carpet was worn but vacuumed regularly. The walls were decorated with family photos and artwork David had made in elementary school. Precious to me, but probably embarrassing to him. This was the home where I raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him. And now it was just a symbol of everything he wanted to escape. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought a lottery ticket. I stopped at the 7-Eleven on my way home from my evening shift at the hospital, still wearing my custodial uniform with my name tag that read, Margaret, Environmental Services. The teenage cashier barely looked at me as I selected my numbers, the same combination I'd used the few times I had played before, James's birthday, David's birthday, our wedding anniversary, and the date we'd arrived in America. I tucked the ticket into my wallet and forgot about it completely. 3 days later, those 6 numbers would change everything. But that night, I just sat in my little duplex, holding David's baby picture and wondering how the son I'd loved so completely had learned to see me as such a burden. The next few days passed in a haze of routine and sadness. I went to work, cleaned hospital rooms and office buildings, came home to my empty duplex, and tried not to think about David's words. You'll die alone. The phrase played on repeat in my mind like a cruel song I couldn't shake. I found myself looking at other families differently during my shifts. In the hospital, I watched adult children visiting elderly parents, bringing flowers and sitting by bedsides, and wondered what I'd done wrong. Why did other mothers get loving, attentive children while mine had grown up to be ashamed of me? Friday morning, I was mopping the pediatric ward when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. Margaret, this is Ashley. David thinks it's best if you don't call or text anymore unless it's an emergency. We need space to focus on our family. Thank you for understanding. Ashley had blocked me from contacting my own son. I stood there in the hospital hallway, holding my mop and reading the message over and over while nurses and doctors walked past me as if I were invisible, which I realized was exactly how my family saw me now. Invisible, unless they needed something. That afternoon, I called my supervisor and took a personal day, something I'd never done in 15 years of working at the hospital. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring at my duplex and wondering what the point of anything was anymore. I'd spent 23 years building my entire life around David's success and happiness. Now that he no longer wanted me in his life, what was left? When I finally went inside, I found myself going through old photo albums, trying to pinpoint when everything had started to change. Was it when he got accepted to Berkeley and realized how different our backgrounds were from his classmates? Was it when he started dating Ashley and saw how her family lived? Or had he always been ashamed of me, just better at hiding it when he needed my financial support?
Saturday evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table paying bills when I remembered the lottery ticket in my wallet. I'd forgotten about it completely until I saw Wednesday's date on my electric bill and realized the drawing had been that night. I pulled up the lottery website on my ancient laptop, the one David had given me 3 Christmases ago, when he decided my old computer was too embarrassing to have in his mother's house when friends visited. The winning numbers were displayed prominently on the homepage: 7, 14, 23, 29, 31, 45. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pulling the ticket from my wallet with shaking hands. 7, James's birthday, July 7th. 14, David's birthday, March 14th. 23, our wedding anniversary, May 23rd. 29, the date we'd arrived in America, September 29th. 31, my birthday, January 31st. 45, the number of years I'd lived in America. Every single number matched. I checked the website again, certain I'd made a mistake. Then I checked the ticket again, looking for some error in the printing or the date. But there was no mistake. I had just won $347 million. $347 million. I sat at my kitchen table in my small duplex, wearing my hospital uniform, holding a piece of paper that had just made me one of the wealthiest people in California. The first emotion wasn't joy or excitement. It was a strange, hollow numbness. 3 days ago, my son had told me I'd die alone because I was an embarrassment to his new life. Tonight, I was worth more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. The irony was so sharp, it actually made me laugh out loud in my empty kitchen. I spent the entire weekend in a state of shock, not telling anyone about the ticket, barely sleeping, just trying to process what had happened. I called in sick to work Monday, something I'd never done unless I was actually ill, and drove to the lottery office in Sacramento to claim my prize. The lottery officials were kind but efficient, explaining tax implications, payment options, and security concerns. I chose the lump sum payment, which came to roughly $180 million after taxes. Still more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes. They offered financial planning services, security consultations, and media management. I accepted all of it, signing papers in a conference room that cost more than my annual salary, while wearing the same Target dress I'd worn to David's college graduation. "Mrs. Chen," the lottery official said as we concluded the paperwork, "you're going to find that your life changes dramatically from this point forward. People will treat you very differently. You'll discover who your real friends and family are, and, unfortunately, you'll also discover who was only interested in what you could provide for them." I thought about David's cruel words, about Ashley's dismissive attitude, about the months of excluded family gatherings and ignored phone calls. "I think I already know," I said quietly. The lottery office agreed to keep my identity confidential for 30 days, while I made arrangements for my new life. I spent that month making careful, deliberate decisions about how I wanted to handle my sudden wealth. First, I hired a team of financial advisors, lawyers, and security specialists, people who worked with ultra-high net worth individuals and understood how to protect both money and privacy. Second, I bought a house. Not a mansion or a showplace, but a beautiful, comfortable home in a gated community in La Jolla with ocean views and enough space for the family I'd always dreamed of hosting. The kind of place where I could finally entertain properly, where David might actually be proud to bring Emma for visits. Third, I established a charitable foundation focused on supporting immigrant families and first-generation college students. The Margaret and James Chen Foundation would provide scholarships, mentoring, and financial assistance to families like mine, people who worked multiple jobs and sacrificed everything for their children's education. Through it all, I didn't contact David. For 30 days, I let him believe his mother was still the embarrassing hospital janitor he was ashamed to include in his Newport Beach lifestyle. I wanted to see what he would do with the space he'd demanded. Would he miss me? Would he reconsider his cruel words? Would he reach out to repair our relationship? He didn't. 30 days passed without a single call, text, or any attempt at contact. My son was perfectly content to have cut his mother out of his life completely. That's when I decided it was time for him to learn about consequences. I instructed my PR team to schedule a press conference for the following Friday. The announcement would be simple. Margaret Chen, a 62-year-old hospital custodian from Riverside, had won $347 million in the California lottery and planned to use her wealth to support immigrant families and education initiatives. The story hit the local news Thursday evening. By Friday morning, it was national news. A working-class immigrant who'd raised her son alone, working double shifts to pay for his education, had suddenly become one of the wealthiest women in California. The interviews were carefully managed by my PR team, but the basic story was true and compelling. I talked about working multiple jobs to support my family, about the sacrifices immigrants make for their children's futures, about plans to help other families achieve the American dream. I didn't mention David by name, but when reporters asked about family, I said simply, I hope to use this blessing to spend more quality time with my loved ones, especially my granddaughter Emma. The story went viral. My phone started ringing Friday afternoon, less than an hour after the press conference aired on the local news. David's number appeared on my caller ID for the first time in over a month. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, then again. By evening, he'd called 17 times and sent 12 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. Mom, I just saw the news. Please call me back. Mom, we need to talk. I know you're upset, but this is important. Mom, please.
Ashley and I want to discuss your plans. We should meet this weekend. Mom, you can't ignore me forever. We're family. Family. The word he'd used so selectively when it suited his purposes. Saturday morning brought a knock at my door. David stood on my doorstep, holding Emma, with Ashley beside him wearing her most sincere smile. They looked like they'd dressed carefully for the occasion. David in his best casual wear, Ashley in designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Mom, David said, his voice warm and loving in a way I hadn't heard in years. Congratulations. We're so happy for you. I looked at him for a long moment. The son who'd told me I'd die alone just 5 weeks earlier, now standing at my door with his daughter and his suddenly eager smile. Hello, David, I said calmly. Ashley. Can we come in? Ashley asked, her voice honey-sweet. We brought Emma to see her grandmother. She's missed you so much. The lies came so easily to them, even now. I stepped aside and let them into my duplex. The same small space David had looked at with such disdain just weeks before. Now his eyes moved around the room differently, as if seeing it through new filters. Mom, we need to talk, David said, settling into my worn armchair with Emma on his lap. About your windfall. About our family. About moving forward. Moving forward. Ashley leaned forward with her practiced smile. Margaret, we've been doing a lot of thinking since David's father passed. We realize we may have been too focused on our own adjustment to parenthood, and we haven't been as inclusive as we should have been. We want to make that right, David added quickly. We want you to be part of Emma's life, part of our lives. I sat down across from them, studying their faces. What's changed? Nothing's changed, David said, though we all knew that was a lie. We've just gained some perspective. Family is the most important thing, and we want to prioritize that relationship. Especially now that Emma's getting older. She needs her grandmother in her life. The same grandmother they'd systematically excluded for months. David, I said quietly, 5 weeks ago, you told me I would die alone if I didn't respect your boundaries. You said I was needy and clingy, that I embarrassed you, that I didn't fit into your world. Ashley sent me a text telling me not to contact you unless it was an emergency. They both looked uncomfortable. Mom, we were going through a stressful time. New parents, financial pressures, Ashley's postpartum issues. We said some things we didn't mean. Financial pressures. Well, the house payment, Emma's expenses, preparing for the future. He gestured vaguely. It's expensive raising a child in Newport Beach. I imagine it is. Ashley spoke up then, her voice carefully modulated. Margaret, we were hoping we could discuss how your good fortune might benefit the whole family. David's been thinking about starting his own business, and with your resources, we could really build something amazing together. There it was, the real reason for their sudden change of heart. What kind of business? I asked. David's eyes lit up. Import-export, focusing on Asian markets. With your background and my business education, we could create something incredible, a real family legacy for Emma. My background. The immigrant background he'd been ashamed of was suddenly an asset now that it came with $180 million. And we were thinking, Ashley continued, maybe you'd like to help with a house upgrade. Emma needs more space, and it would be wonderful if you could have your own wing when you visit. Your own wing, in their house, funded by my lottery winnings. I looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in David's arms, and felt my heart break all over again. Not for my son's greed or his wife's manipulation, but for this innocent child who would grow up learning that love was conditional, that family meant transaction, that relationships existed to be leveraged for personal gain. That all sounds very interesting, I said finally, but I've already made plans for my money. Both David and Ashley looked alarmed. What kind of plans? David asked quickly. I've established a charitable foundation.
The Margaret and James Chen Foundation. It will provide scholarships and support for immigrant families, first-generation college students, and people working multiple jobs to support their children's education. That's wonderful, Mom, David said, though his smile looked strained. Very generous, but surely you've set aside money for family as well. I have. Relief flooded both their faces. I've set aside money to ensure that Emma has a college fund, should she choose to pursue higher education. The fund will be managed by an independent trustee and will be available to her when she turns 18, provided she maintains a relationship with me and demonstrates the kind of character values her grandfather and I believed in. What does that mean? Ashley asked sharply. It means Emma will need to earn her inheritance through kindness, respect, and genuine family connection, not through entitlement or manipulation. David's face was darkening. Mom, you can't put conditions on family support. I can, and I have. Emma will receive support for her education and future, but only if she grows up understanding that family means more than financial transactions. What about us? Ashley demanded. What about David's business plans? I looked at my son. This man I'd raised alone, worked double shifts to support, sacrificed everything to give opportunities to. David, I said softly, 5 weeks ago you told me I was an embarrassment to your life. You said I didn't fit into your world, that I dragged you down socially, that my immigrant mindset was something to be ashamed of. You excluded me from family gatherings, blocked my calls, and told me I would die alone. Mom, I explained that we were under stress. You meant every word, I interrupted. And now that I have money, suddenly my immigrant background is an asset for your business plans? Suddenly my presence is welcome in your lives? Suddenly I'm family again. Ashley stood up abruptly. Margaret, I think you're being unreasonable. David loves you. We all love you. Money shouldn't change family relationships. You're absolutely right, I said, standing as well. Money shouldn't change family relationships, but it has revealed what our relationship really was. David stood too, holding Emma protectively. What does that mean? It means I spent 30 years believing that sacrifice and generosity would earn me love and respect from my family. I learned that I was wrong. You love what I can provide, not who I am. That's not true, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. David, you didn't call me once in 5 weeks. Not to check on my health, not to share Emma's milestones, not to include me in family activities. But within hours of my lottery win being announced, you called 17 times. We wanted to celebrate with you. You wanted to position yourselves for financial benefit. Ashley's mask was slipping. Margaret, David is your only child. Emma is your only grandchild. Don't you want to provide for your family? I am providing for my family. I'm providing for Emma's future education, contingent on her growing up with better values than her parents have demonstrated. And what about David? Ashley pressed. What about his dreams, his business plans? I looked at my son, this man who'd told me I would die alone, who'd been ashamed to include me in his life, who'd only reconciled with me when money entered the equation. David is a grown man with a college education I sacrificed to provide. He has a job, a wife, and a beautiful daughter.
He has everything he needs to build his own life without his mother's lottery winnings. "Mom, please," David said, his voice taking on the wheedling tone he'd used as a child when he wanted something. "We're family. Families help each other." "You're right. Families do help each other. They also respect each other, include each other, and love each other unconditionally. When you're ready to offer that kind of family relationship, we can discuss financial support." "What does that mean?" Ashley demanded. "It means David needs to apologize for his cruelty, demonstrate genuine change in how he treats me, and prove that he values me as a person, not a bank account. Until then, my money will go toward helping families who actually appreciate sacrifice and understand the value of unconditional love." David's face was red with anger now. "Mom, you can't punish us forever for one bad conversation. I'm not punishing anyone."
I'm protecting myself from being used and disrespected again. "So what now?" Ashley asked coldly. "You're going to cut us off completely?" "I'm going to live my life with dignity and surround myself with people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. If you'd like to rebuild a genuine relationship based on love and respect, I'm open to that. But I will never again fund my own mistreatment." They left that day angry and empty-handed, Emma crying in the car as they drove away from their failed financial mission. That was 6 months ago. In the time since, I've discovered what it feels like to live according to my own values instead of other people's expectations. I moved into my beautiful home in La Jolla, where I have an ocean view and enough space to entertain the way I'd always dreamed of. I've traveled to places James and I always wanted to see together, honoring his memory while creating new experiences. I went to Taiwan to visit relatives I hadn't seen in decades, reconnecting with my roots instead of being ashamed of them. The Margaret and James Chen Foundation has awarded its first round of scholarships to 200 students whose parents work multiple jobs to support their children's education. I meet with recipients regularly, and their gratitude and respect remind me what genuine family relationships should feel like. I've joined volunteer organizations, donated to causes I care about, and discovered that generosity feels very different when it's appreciated rather than expected. 3 months ago, I received a handwritten letter from David. Not a text message or an email, but an actual letter written in his careful handwriting. "Mom," it began, "I've had time to think about what you said, and I realize you were right. I treated you terribly, took your sacrifices for granted, and valued what you could give me more than who you are as a person. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The letter continued for 3 pages, acknowledging specific instances of his cruelty, taking responsibility for his actions, and explaining how he'd been working to understand his own behavior with a counselor. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," he wrote. "I don't expect you to change your financial decisions. I just want you to know that I understand now what I lost when I chose pride and status over love and family." He included photos of Emma, now walking and saying her first words. In one picture, she was holding a drawing she'd scribbled, and David had written on the back, "Emma drew this picture of her grandmother. She asks about you every day." I cried reading that letter, not from sadness, but from hope. For the first time in years, my son was communicating with me as a person rather than a resource. I wrote back, a shorter letter thanking him for his honesty and expressing my love for both him and Emma. I didn't mention money, or conditions, or timelines. I simply told him that I missed him and would welcome the opportunity to rebuild our relationship slowly and authentically. We've been exchanging letters ever since. Real letters, handwritten and thoughtful, where we share our feelings and experiences rather than making demands or excuses. Last month, he asked if he could bring Emma to visit my new house, not to discuss business opportunities or financial support, but simply to let his daughter meet her grandmother properly. I said yes. Emma is 18 months old now, walking confidently and babbling constantly in the mixed English and Mandarin I've been teaching her during our weekly video calls. She calls me Nai Nai, grandmother, in Chinese, and claps her hands when she sees my face on the screen. When David brought Emma to visit my new home in La Jolla for the first time, I watched him walk through the front door and stop in the marble foyer, his eyes taking in the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier, and the panoramic ocean view through floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't the embarrassing duplex he'd looked down on just months earlier. This was a home that could easily fit into his Newport Beach social circle. A place where Ashley's parents would feel comfortable, where business associates could be entertained properly. But what struck me most wasn't his obvious amazement at the luxury. It was the way he held Emma protectively, as if he was afraid she might break something in my beautiful new space. "Mom, this is incredible," he said softly, his voice carrying genuine awe. "The view is breathtaking." Emma wriggled in his arms, reaching toward me with chubby hands. "Nai Nai," she called out, using the Mandarin word I'd been teaching her during our video calls. I took her from David's arms, and for the first time in over a year, my granddaughter settled against me peacefully, playing with my necklace and babbling happily. David watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "She really has missed you," he said quietly. "She points at your photos and says your name." We spent the afternoon on my terrace overlooking the Pacific, Emma playing with toys I'd bought specifically for her visit, while David and I talked carefully around the enormous elephant in the room. Neither of us mentioned the lottery money directly, but it colored every interaction, every observation about my new life. "How are you adjusting to all the changes?" he asked as Emma napped in his lap. "It's been overwhelming. I never imagined having choices like this. The financial advisors keep showing me investment portfolios and real estate opportunities, and I find myself thinking about your father constantly, wondering what he would have wanted me to do." David was quiet for a long moment. "Dad would have wanted you to be happy, to live the life you put on hold while raising me." It was the first time in years he'd acknowledged my sacrifices without defensiveness or irritation. "I keep thinking about the trips we planned but never took, the small luxuries we talked about someday. He always said that someday we'd eat at fancy restaurants and stay in nice hotels, that all the hard work would be worth it eventually." "Are you taking those trips now?" "Some of them. I went to Taiwan last month to visit my cousin Li Wei. I hadn't seen her in 23 years, and she's the only family I have left there." I paused, remembering the emotional reunion. She kept crying and saying she couldn't believe little Margaret had become so successful in America. David smiled slightly. "Little Margaret?" That's what they called me when I first arrived. I was so young and scared, barely speaking English, working in restaurant kitchens and cleaning offices at night. Li Wei used to send me care packages with Chinese tea and mooncakes. I never knew that. There's a lot about my early years you never knew. I didn't want you to think of your mother as someone who struggled so much. I wanted you to see America as the land of opportunity, not the place where your parents scrubbed floors to survive. The admission hung between us. David shifted Emma gently, his face thoughtful. "Is that why you never talked about Taiwan? About your family there?" "Partly, and partly because you seemed so eager to be completely American. When you were in high school, you stopped wanting to speak Mandarin at home. You said it was embarrassing when friends heard us talking in Chinese." David winced. "I remember that. I was awful about a lot of things. You were young. Children often reject their parents' culture before they learn to value it. But you stopped speaking Mandarin with me completely after that, even when we were alone. I thought that's what you wanted. I thought if I became more American, you'd be less ashamed of me." The words came out more honestly than I'd intended. David's face crumpled slightly. "Mom, I was never ashamed of you being Chinese. I was ashamed of being poor. I was ashamed of you working as a custodian while my classmates' parents were doctors and lawyers. I took that shame out on you in terrible ways.
It was the most direct acknowledgement he'd ever made of his behavior. When I got to Berkeley, he continued, I met kids whose immigrant parents were professors or tech executives or successful business owners. I realized that being first-generation American wasn't the problem. The problem was that I'd been an ungrateful brat who didn't appreciate what you'd accomplished. Emma stirred in his arms, making soft cooing sounds. David's voice dropped to avoid waking her. I spent my junior year in a psychology class learning about intergenerational trauma and immigrant family dynamics. The professor talked about children who reject their parents' culture out of a desire to assimilate, and how that rejection damages both generations. He looked directly at me. I wrote my final paper about you, about us, about how my pursuit of social acceptance nearly destroyed the most important relationship in my life. I felt tears building in my eyes. You never told me about that paper. I was too ashamed. And by then, I was already dating Ashley, already getting caught up in her family's world, already making choices that pushed you further away. Tell me about Ashley's family, I said, surprising myself with the request. David hesitated. They're complicated. Her father owns 12 boutique hotels across Southern California. Her mother has never worked, spends her time on charity committees and country club social events. They live in a world where your value is measured by your address, your car, your children's private school, your vacation destinations. And they accepted you? They accepted my potential. Harvard MBA, corporate job, the right ambitions. But they always made subtle comments about my background. Ashley's mother would introduce me to friends as David, the young man with the fascinating family story. Like I was some kind of exotic charity case they'd rescued. I absorbed this information, understanding more about the pressures he'd faced. When Emma was born, David's parents immediately started making plans for her future. Private preschool applications, early admission strategies for elite elementary schools, connections for summer programs. They have Emma's entire educational path mapped out through high school. And they see my involvement as a threat to those plans? David nodded slowly. Ashley's mother made comments about wanting Emma to have refined influences and appropriate role models. She never said anything directly, but the message was clear. And you allowed that? He was quiet for a long time. I allowed a lot of things I shouldn't have. I got so caught up in proving I belonged in their world that I forgot where I actually came from. Emma woke up then, looking around my terrace with wide eyes before focusing on the ocean view. She pointed toward the water and made excited babbling sounds. Ocean, I said to her in English. Hi, I added in Mandarin. Hi, Emma repeated, clapping her hands.
David smiled. She's learning Mandarin from Ashley's nanny. The nanny is from Hong Kong, and Ashley thought it would be good for Emma to be bilingual. But not from her Chinese grandmother? David's face reddened. At the time, we thought... We weren't thinking clearly about a lot of things. We spent another hour playing with Emma, teaching her simple words in both languages, watching her toddle around my terrace with the fearless confidence of a child who knows she's loved and safe. As the afternoon sun began to set, David strapped Emma into her car seat and prepared to leave. At my front door, he turned back to me. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would it be okay if we came back next week? Emma loves it here, and I'd like to spend more time talking. There's a lot I need to say to you. Of course, you're welcome anytime. And Mom, thank you for not slamming the door in my face. After everything I said, everything I did, you had every right to refuse to see me. David, you're my son. That hasn't changed, even when everything else did. He hugged me then, carefully and briefly, but it was the first physical affection he'd shown me in over 2 years. After they left, I stood in my empty house, looking out at the ocean and processing everything that had been said. For the first time since winning the lottery, I felt hope that my son might actually be changing, not just because of my money, but because he was finally mature enough to understand what he'd lost. Over the following weeks, David and Emma visited regularly. Sometimes Ashley came with them, her behavior noticeably more respectful than it had been before. She complimented my home, asked polite questions about my foundation work, and even attempted basic conversation in Mandarin with Emma. But I could see the calculation behind her friendliness. She was performing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law, hoping to position herself favorably for future financial considerations. The real breakthrough came during David's 4th visit, when he arrived alone. "Where's Emma?" I asked as he settled into my living room. "With Ashley's mother. I wanted to talk to you privately about something important." He looked nervous, fidgeting with his car keys the way he used to as a child when he'd done something wrong. "I've been thinking about what you said, about proving that I value you as a person rather than a bank account. I want to do something that demonstrates my commitment to rebuilding our relationship." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to quit my corporate job and start working for your foundation." I stared at him, certain I'd misunderstood. "What?" "I've been researching the Margaret and James Chen Foundation online. I've read about your scholarship programs, your mentoring initiatives, your support for immigrant families. It's exactly the kind of work I should have been doing all along, instead of chasing money and status." "David, working for my foundation wouldn't prove your independence. It would make you financially dependent on me again." "That's why I want to do it for free. Volunteer work, no salary, no financial compensation of any kind. I want to contribute my business skills to causes that actually matter." I was quiet for a long moment, trying to assess his sincerity. "What does Ashley think about this plan?" David's expression darkened slightly. "Ashley thinks I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. She's not supportive of the idea. And if your volunteering with the foundation creates problems in your marriage, then I'll deal with those problems. Mom, I spent years prioritizing Ashley's approval over our relationship. I'm not going to make that mistake again." It was a significant statement, but I wanted to understand the full scope of what he was proposing. "David, if you volunteer with the foundation, you'll be working with families like ours used to be. Immigrants working multiple jobs, parents sacrificing everything for their children's education, people struggling with language barriers and cultural challenges. You'll see your own privilege clearly, and it might be uncomfortable. I need to see that. I need to understand what you went through, what you sacrificed, what I took for granted for so many years. And you're prepared to do this work without any expectation of inheriting money from me?" David nodded firmly. "I don't want your lottery money, Mom. I want your respect. I want to earn back the relationship I destroyed through my selfishness and ingratitude." 6 months later, David was working 20 hours a week with the foundation, interviewing scholarship applicants, mentoring first-generation college students, and helping immigrant families navigate educational systems and financial aid processes. I watched him during these interactions, saw him listening intently to stories of sacrifice and determination that mirrored our own family's journey. He worked with a Vietnamese mother who cleaned offices at night to pay for her daughter's nursing school tuition. He helped a Mexican father understand college application requirements for his son who wanted to study engineering.
Slowly, I saw my son rediscovering the values James and I had tried to instill in him. The appreciation for hard work and family loyalty that had gotten lost somewhere in his pursuit of social status. The change wasn't without consequences. Ashley became increasingly resentful of David's volunteer work, complaining that it took time away from his corporate career advancement and didn't contribute to their household income. "Your mother has millions of dollars," I overheard her saying during one of their visits, "and you're working for free, like some kind of charity case? It's humiliating." David's response surprised me. "My mother's money isn't mine, Ashley. And this work isn't charity. It's the most meaningful thing I've done in years." "But what about Emma's future? What about our financial goals?" "Emma's future will be fine. She has a college fund, she has 2 working parents, and she has a grandmother who will ensure she has opportunities. What she needs more than money is parents who demonstrate integrity and gratitude."
These conversations revealed the growing tension in their marriage. Ashley had married David partly for his earning potential and social aspirations. A husband who volunteered with immigrant families and spoke proudly of his custodian mother didn't fit her original vision of their life together. The crisis came during Christmas, 9 months after my lottery win. David asked if they could host Christmas dinner at my house, wanting Emma to experience a traditional Chinese-American celebration with homemade dumplings and red-cooked chicken. Ashley reluctantly agreed, but she arrived at my house that day dressed for a country club event rather than a family gathering, her discomfort with the entire situation obvious. When David's foundation colleagues, a diverse group of immigrants and first-generation Americans, joined us for dinner, Ashley's discomfort turned to barely concealed contempt. She made small talk with Dr. Patel, whose parents had immigrated from India, and Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband worked construction while she finished her teaching degree. But I could see her mentally calculating their social value, finding them lacking in the sophistication she preferred. The breaking point came when Emma, now 2 years old and speaking both English and Mandarin fluently, chose to sit with Mrs. Rodriguez's elderly mother rather than next to Ashley. "Emma, come sit with Mommy," Ashley called out sharply. Emma looked confused, but obediently started toward Ashley. The elderly woman, Mrs. Rodriguez's mother, who spoke limited English, smiled and waved goodbye to Emma. "Zaijian, Nai-Nai," Emma said sweetly, waving back. Ashley's face went white. "David, why is our daughter calling that woman grandmother?" The room went quiet. Mrs. Rodriguez looked embarrassed. David looked mortified. And I felt anger rising in my chest like a physical force. "Ashley," I said quietly, "Mrs. Rodriguez's mother is a respected elder who is being kind to Emma. In Chinese culture, it's common for children to use respectful terms like nai-nai for elderly women." "I don't care about Chinese culture," Ashley snapped, her polite mask finally slipping completely. "I don't want Emma picking up random cultural habits from people we barely know." The silence that followed was deafening. David stood up slowly, his face pale with anger. "Ashley, these people are our friends. They're good people who are working hard to build better lives for their families, just like my mother did for me." "Your mother is different," Ashley said desperately, realizing she had revealed too much. "She's successful now. She's wealthy. She's not—" "Not what?" David asked coldly. Ashley looked around the room at the faces watching her, all of them understanding exactly what she meant but couldn't say out loud. "Not like them," she finished weakly. Mrs. Rodriguez gathered her purse and coat. "I think we should go," she said diplomatically. "No," said David firmly. "You're our guests, and you're welcome here. Ashley, if you can't treat our friends with respect, you can leave." It was the first time I'd ever heard my son stand up to his wife on a matter of principle. Ashley stared at him in shock. "You're choosing them over me? I'm choosing common decency over prejudice. I'm choosing the values my parents taught me over the elitism you learned from your family." Ashley left that night, taking Emma with her, and declaring that she needed space to think about their marriage. David stayed to help clean up, working alongside Dr. Patel and the Rodriguez family as if nothing had happened. But I could see the pain in his eyes as he processed what his wife had revealed about her true feelings. After our guests left, David and I sat on my terrace, looking out at the ocean in comfortable silence. "I'm sorry about Ashley," he said finally. "I knew she had some prejudice, but I didn't realize how deep they went." "What happens now?" "I don't know. She's talking about counseling, about working through our differences, but I'm not sure we can work through fundamental disagreements about values and respect." "And Emma?"
David's face crumpled slightly. "Emma is the hardest part. I don't want her growing up with Ashley's prejudices, but I also don't want to lose time with my daughter." We sat quietly for a while, both of us thinking about the complexity of family relationships, the way love and loyalty could conflict with personal growth and moral principles. "David," I said finally, "whatever happens with your marriage, I want you to know how proud I am of the man you've become this past year. You've rediscovered your integrity, your compassion, your connection to your heritage. That growth is separate from whatever Ashley decides to do. I feel like I'm finally becoming the son Dad would have been proud of. Your father was always proud of you. Even when you made mistakes, even when you chose poorly, he loved you completely, just like I did. Even when I told you that you'd die alone? The words hung in the air between us. I'd been waiting for months for him to address that specific cruelty directly. Even then, I said softly, though I won't lie and say it didn't break my heart. I've thought about that night every day since. The way I spoke to you, the things I said about your work, your home, your place in my life. I was so focused on proving myself to Ashley's family that I lost sight of what really mattered. And what really matters? Love, respect, gratitude, understanding that success isn't measured by your address or your bank account, but by how you treat the people who sacrificed for you. David took a deep breath before continuing. Mom, I need to tell you something I should have said months ago. When I told you that you'd die alone, I was projecting my own fears. I was afraid that I'd chosen a life so focused on status and wealth that I'd end up spiritually bankrupt, surrounded by people who only valued what I could provide for them. And now? Now I realize that dying alone isn't about being physically isolated. It's about living without authentic connections, without people who love you for who you are rather than what you have. Ashley's family loves what I can contribute to their social standing. You love me despite my failures and mistakes. We talked until nearly midnight, sharing memories of James, discussing Emma's future, and planning foundation projects that would honor the values that had brought our family to America. When David finally left, he hugged me tightly at the door. Mom, I know I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I promise you this, you will never die alone. Even if Ashley and I can't work things out, even if life becomes complicated, you'll always have me and Emma. You'll always have family who loves and appreciates you. As I watched his taillights disappear down my driveway, I thought about the journey we'd both taken since that devastating phone call almost 2 years earlier. My son had told me I'd die alone, then 6 lottery numbers had given me the resources to discover who truly valued my presence in their lives. The money had been a blessing, but the real gift was clarity. I'd learned the difference between being needed and being loved, between financial transactions and genuine relationships, between funding someone's lifestyle and supporting their character. David was still struggling with the consequences of his growth, still figuring out how to balance his evolving values with his existing commitments. But for the first time in years, I had hope that my son was becoming the man his father and I had always believed he could be. The lottery had given me financial freedom, but watching David rediscover his integrity had given me something far more valuable: the restoration of faith in family, love, and the possibility of redemption. 3 months after that disastrous Christmas dinner, David called me with news that would reshape everything once again. Ashley had filed for divorce and was demanding full custody of Emma, claiming that David's association with unsuitable influences made him an unfit father. The unsuitable influences, according to her legal filing, included his volunteer work with immigrant families and his renewed relationship with his culturally backward mother. She'd actually used those words in a legal document. David's voice was steady when he told me, but I could hear the underlying devastation. She's also demanding spousal support and half of everything we own, including the equity in the house. What does your lawyer say? That we have a strong case for joint custody since I've been an involved father, but Ashley's family has hired expensive attorneys and they're going to make this as difficult as possible. I felt a familiar surge of protective anger, the same feeling I'd had when David was bullied in elementary school. But this time, the situation was far more complex. David, how can I help? You can't, Mom. This is something I need to handle on my own. Ashley's already claiming that you're trying to buy influence over Emma with your lottery money. If you get involved financially, it'll just support her narrative. That night I lay awake thinking about my granddaughter, imagining her caught in the middle of this bitter conflict. Emma was too young to understand why her parents suddenly lived in different houses, why every conversation between them was tense and formal. But she wasn't too young to absorb the emotional atmosphere, to sense that her world was fracturing along fault lines she couldn't comprehend.
2 weeks later, David moved into a modest apartment near his old corporate job, which he had quietly returned to in order to demonstrate financial stability during the custody proceedings. He could no longer afford the volunteer work with my foundation, needing every available hour for paid employment. Ashley immediately began a campaign to limit David's access to Emma. Suddenly, every scheduled visit became a negotiation. Emma had playdates that conflicted with David's weekends. She had alleged illnesses that prevented overnight stays. Ashley enrolled her in activities that happened exclusively during David's custody time. I watched my son navigate this emotional minefield with remarkable grace, never speaking negatively about Ashley in front of Emma, always prioritizing his daughter's well-being over his own anger. During one of Emma's visits to my house, she looked around with the confused expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities. "Where Mama?" she asked, her vocabulary still limited, but her emotional intelligence acute. "Mama's at her house," David explained gently.
You have Daddy's house and Mama's house now. Emma considered this information seriously. Nine-Eye house too? Yes, sweetheart. Nine-Eye's house is for visiting when you're with Daddy. She seemed satisfied with this explanation, but I noticed she clung more tightly to both of us during that visit, as if sensing the fragility of these new arrangements. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Ashley made a strategic mistake. During a supervised visit exchange, she loudly berated David in front of Emma and the court-appointed mediator. "You chose your immigrant mother and her charity work over your own family," she screamed in the parking lot of a McDonald's. "Emma doesn't need to be exposed to those people and their backward values." The mediator, a patient woman named Dr. Martinez, who had been documenting both parents' behavior, noted Ashley's outburst and its xenophobic undertones. When she filed her report with the family court, she recommended that David receive primary custody, with Ashley having supervised visitation until she completed anger management counseling. The judge agreed. 3 weeks later, Emma moved into David's apartment permanently, visiting Ashley every other weekend under the watchful eye of a social worker. Ashley's expensive lawyers had backfired spectacularly, her family's wealth and connections meaningless in the face of documented prejudice and emotional instability. David called me the night Emma's custody was finalized, his voice thick with relief and exhaustion. "Mom, she's safe. Emma's gonna grow up knowing that family means love and respect, not money and status." "How are you managing? Financially, emotionally, practically?" "It's hard. Daycare is expensive and I can't work late anymore because I need to pick her up. But we're figuring it out. Emma's resilient and she's happier now that the constant conflict is over." That evening, I made a decision that felt both necessary and overdue. I called my financial advisor and arranged to establish a trust fund specifically designed to support David and Emma's daily needs without creating dependency. The trust would cover Emma's childcare, medical expenses, and reasonable housing costs. It would ensure that David could provide stability for his daughter without sacrificing his professional development or returning to the soul-crushing pursuit of wealth that had nearly destroyed our relationship. But the trust came with conditions that reflected everything I'd learned about family, money, and values over the past 2 years. The money could only be used for Emma's direct benefit or for housing that would accommodate my regular visits as her grandmother. David couldn't access cash directly, couldn't use the funds for luxury purchases or status symbols. Most importantly, the trust would terminate if David ever again prioritized social advancement over family relationships, or if he allowed anyone to disrespect family members based on their background, occupation, or cultural heritage. When I explained the trust to David, he was quiet for a long time. "Mom, I appreciate this more than you know, but I need you to understand something important. Even without this support, even if money becomes tight, I will never again choose status over family. What I learned working with the foundation, what I realized during this divorce, what I remember from watching you sacrifice for me, that's permanent. That's who I am now. I know, but this trust isn't about controlling your choices.
It's about ensuring that Emma grows up with stability and opportunities, and that you don't have to sacrifice your integrity to provide for her. 1 year later, David and Emma had settled into a rhythm that honored both their Chinese heritage and their American opportunities. Every Sunday, they came to my house for traditional family dinners where Emma practiced her Mandarin and learned to make dumplings with her nai. David had been promoted at his corporate job, not because he was chasing advancement, but because his work with immigrant families had given him unique insights into multicultural business relationships. His supervisor, impressed by his language skills and cultural competency, had assigned him to develop partnerships with Asian American business networks. Emma, now 3 years old, was fluent in both languages and comfortable with both cultures. She played just as happily with Dr. Patel's grandchildren as she did with the children from Ashley's social circle during their supervised visits. Ashley had completed her court-mandated counseling and had gradually earned back unsupervised visitation rights. She was more careful now about expressing her prejudices openly, though I suspected they remained largely unchanged. Emma would always have to navigate the tension between her mother's values and her father's values, but at least she had one parent committed to teaching her respect for all people. On the second anniversary of my lottery win, I hosted a celebration dinner at my house for everyone who had become important to me over those transformative 2 years. David and Emma were there, of course, along with Dr. Patel and his family, the Rodriguez family, my neighbor Rose Martinez, and several of the scholarship recipients from my foundation. As I looked around my dining room table, listening to conversations in English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Hindi, watching Emma switch effortlessly between languages and cultural contexts, I realized that my son's cruel prediction had been completely wrong. I wasn't dying alone. I was living surrounded by people who valued my presence, my contributions, my friendship. I had built a chosen family based on mutual respect and shared values, supplemented by the biological family that had finally learned to appreciate what they nearly lost. David stood up during dessert to make a toast. 2 years ago, I told my mother something unforgivable. I told her she would die alone because she didn't fit into the life I thought I wanted. Tonight, looking around this table, I see the truth. My mother will never die alone because she has surrounded herself with people who recognize her worth, her kindness, her strength. You turned to me directly. Mom, you taught me that family isn't about who shares your DNA or your social status. Family is about who shows up for you, who respects you, who celebrates your successes and supports you through difficulties. Thank you for not giving up on me when I forgot that lesson. As our guests left that evening, Enna fell asleep in my arms while David and I cleaned up together in comfortable silence. Looking at my granddaughter's peaceful face, I thought about the future I could now provide for her. Excellent education, cultural pride, financial security, and most importantly, a family that would teach her to value people for their character rather than their bank accounts. The lottery money had given me choices I'd never imagined having, but the real prize was sitting in my arms, a granddaughter who would grow up understanding that love and respect are the only currencies that truly matter. My son told me I'd die alone, and then 6 numbers changed everything. Not because they made me wealthy, but because they gave me the power to demand the treatment I deserved and to surround myself with people who appreciated the woman I'd always been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.